Good morning, world. This is Steve Ralph, the host of Pod and Roku TV's World Edition. I greet you live from North Carolina, the eighth largest state in the United States, in my hometown of Morrisville, which is in the Research Triangle Park, near Duke, Carolina, and NC State. Today, we want to open up the show. We have a very special guest about guns. We're seeing so much gun violence in the United States. I think over 25,000 have died in gun homicides this year. We had one here in North Carolina, UNC Chapel Hill recently. But before I bring on the guest, just a couple of big things to talk about today. First, the government shutdown. We are once again, every time this year at this point, the Republicans and Democrats have agreed in the Senate on a stopgap spending plan that would keep the government funded until November 17th and prevent a shutdown. The bill could receive formal approval in the Senate today, but the problem is it's being held up in the House because they disapprove of the $6 billion we're giving to Ukraine. The speaker's race in the House could be at stake as well, and it would need approval in both houses to avoid a shutdown. We have only until Friday, so let's keep our fingers crossed that we don't have the first government shutdown a lot. Meanwhile, the United Auto Workers heard from President Biden. President Trump, I think, is speaking today. He's not attending the debate. And in California, by the way, there is the debate, the second debate, and Asa Hutchinson was not approved for this, the former governor of Arkansas, but it's pretty much without Donald Trump. You've got DeSantis, you've got Pence, you've got Nikki Haley, you've got Tim Scott, to name a few, Chris Christie. But at the end of the day, before I open it up to our guests, I think this is going to be the final chance for the Republicans, in addition to Donald Trump, to make their case. Despite all of the charges and indictments, his gap over the other Republicans is increased, and the strategy of not debating and not going out there is actually working for him. So with all things being equal, if things do not change, our prediction is that Donald Trump will be the Republican nominee for President of the United States in 2024, facing up a potential rematch with Joe Biden, who has continued to say he will run again, despite calls from many people in his party stand down as the nominee. We'll be talking about this on World Politics tomorrow at 5 p.m. Now, join me in welcoming Mark Lee to the show, who will introduce our guest. Thank you, Mark.
No problem. Glad to have an amazing guest. We've got Regina Greigo, and I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly and all along those lines, but she has definitely been involved in the gun advocacy fight, having had a direct encounter with this gun violence and all along that line. But I'll let her tell her story and definitely even some of the statistics that I heard from her as well. But like you said, it's a very pertinent issue and all along those lines. But definitely, Regina, if you would just share a little bit about what you went through and all along those lines, because, a lot of times we hear these stories and we don't always have direct involvement. I know that I've oftentimes talked about on this news show, and Steve mentioned that he has relatives that have gone to UNC. I have relatives that are there as well, and they just have that recent gun shooting. But there was also a murder that was taken there not that long ago, and all in that space. And that was actually one of my uncle's cousins on the uncle's nieces on the other side, so not on my mom's family, and all along those lines. And definitely there was gun violence many years ago that I have a second cousin that they lost their and it sounds similar to your situation. They lost their parents to gun violence. One of the parents killed the other parent, and they lived with that for their lives, and they are still living with it even now, because they are probably in their 40s or 50s, if I'm remembering their ages correctly, and all along those lines. But definitely, it was a impact. He went to prison for that here in North Carolina, and he's out of prison now. And I think he may be still living, but he did serve a long prison term and all in that space. But I was just wondering if you could share a little bit about what was happening in your case and how it brought you into this gun advocacy role.
Yes, thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here. In January of 2013, my nephew, who was 15 at the time, later we found that he was operating with the brain of a 13-year-old, shot and killed his father, who is my brother, his mother, and his two young sisters. One was 6 and one was 2, and his brother, who was 9 years old. It was a shock to the family. We didn't see it coming. Later, we found out a lot of what was going on with the family. And my brother had been in the military, and we also suffered a lot of generational trauma, which is typical in these kinds of situations. And so I believe that my brother had some things like PTSD, and he was a gunner in the military, so I think he also may have had a TBI. His son had a TBI because my brother knocked him unconscious at age 11 and was kind of training him to be a soldier. Now, there were 8 firearms found in the home, unsecured, and 15,000 rounds of ammunition. And my brother had trained his son to use all of these weapons. Now, he was a pastor, and he chose to keep his children home and homeschool them. So there was nobody else that really kept daily eyes on this kid. And it turned out that he was having hallucinations, both audio and visual hallucinations. And that night, with full intent, his biggest intent was to escape his home. And he was very afraid of his father. And he had what they diagnosed him with was trauma-induced schizoaffective disorder with extreme depression. And this is the thing that, and he didn't tell his family that he was having these hallucinations because of their very, very, I would say, extreme Christian beliefs about psychology and psychotherapy. He was afraid they might say that he had demons and that he needed to be, purged of these demons or whatever like that. So that it was an all-around tragedy. I see it as a tragedy. There was a lot going on with my brother. He had just lost his, I would say, his dream job or his vocation, his life's work, which was being a pastor at the largest evangelical church in Albuquerque 10 months prior to this event. And so there was a lot of changes in the family, both financial, but emotionally. My brother changed quite a bit, and the children took the brunt of it. And this kid, I wish there were so many things we would have known in advance, but the bottom line is if those guns hadn't been there, I think my family would be alive today.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I know that part of the things that you talk about, and you kind of alluded to it, is the notion of protecting, if you're going to have guns in the house, protecting them or keeping them secure and all along those lines. So is this something even in your own studies and your own advocacy that you're finding that we're not doing enough of in societies? Because I know that there's, Steve alluded to, there are a lot of people that are owning guns, but I know that there's even been a very popular commercial where there is a family that is running and trying to find out if their son, and the implication is that he is committing suicide and all along those lines in that commercial because they left their gun unsecured. So it sounds like that was similar to what happened in your case, is that the gentleman had an unsecured gun.
Yes, and over 18,000 children are killed each year, many, many more wounded. And about more than twice, the largest number, about 2/3 is homicides, 1/3 is suicide. And then there's accidental shootings, and these are rough numbers. But it's to me, it's a terrible indictment of our country that the kids die from the number one cause of death for children is homicide, or is guns. Death by gun is the number one killer of kids, beyond anything else, beyond accidents, beyond illness, beyond whatever, which is truly a shame. And you're exactly right. Access to guns is the biggest problem. Responsible gun owners, and we have hunters in our family, know to keep a safe or something and lock their weapons away. And in fact, this last year, and it's taken us 3 years, I'm a member of the local grassroots organization called Moms Demand Action. I'm the survivor membership lead, meaning I work with people that have been directly impacted by gun violence. And the number one, the law that we got passed this year was a child access law. And what that law does is hold the gun owner responsible if a child gains access to a gun and it's unsecured. And, there's a very loose definition right now of a secured weapon. If you have it locked in a drawer or with gun locks and stuff like that, right now it counts. A lot of what we're trying to go to is trying to figure out how we can distribute things like safes and whatnot, and obviously electronics. I'm an engineer. There's ways of securing weapons using, your fingerprint or your eye, your face recognition. But anyway, this child access law, if a child gets a gun and brandishes it, in other words, takes it out and threatens anybody with it, the owner of that gun, usually the parents, because you know that most of, especially if you listen to the mass shootings, a lot of these mass shootings, the guns come from the parent's home. Then there's a misdemeanor against the parent or against the owner. And then if it's used in bodily harm, in a situation of bodily harm, then there's a 4th degree felony. And in my brother's case, the extent that it got to, obviously, my brother had passed away, so this isn't relevant. The idea is to create a deterrence. And like I said, responsible gun owners, if they're trained through their gun safety and whatnot, that this is what you do and this is how you do it, which is one of the things we try to teach as well, then they will follow, the rules. And there's other access that is difficult, and we need to investigate things like trafficking of guns. And that is that if they keep them in their cars, that's an easy target to get guns. So when people talk about criminals and their guns, well, we need to secure guns away from criminals as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I know another thing that you talk about, and we'll bring in some of the other panelists very shortly as well, is the mental health aspect. And I do know that can have a direct impact, and you kind of alluded to that as well earlier. But even in the case I was talking about with my second cousins and all along those lines, they were children. All of them were children when that incident took place with their mother and father and everything. But I'm sure it has impacted their life in terms of relationships, in terms of other ways as well, even though they are seeming to be very well adjusted, or as well adjusted as you can be when you went through something like that as a child, and all along those lines. But they definitely have great careers and don't seem to have any direct impact. But like I said, one doesn't know what's going on in people's minds all the time and all along those lines. But as best I can tell, they are well adjusted and everything. But I do know that mental health has been a concern, both of those that are having the guns as well as those that are impacted by the gun violence. So I was just wondering your thoughts around the mental health aspect as well.
Well, one of the things I want to create is a distinction between true mental illness, and mental crisis, or things like, being, super stressed out, or what. True mental illness, the mentally ill generally do not commit these kinds of crimes. It's the people that are having, depression or, these mental events, extreme pressure in their family. So it's not like they're, permanently ill. You know what I mean? It's just a situation that happens to them. That's what happened to my nephew, and he was put under antipsychotics, but he was able to go off those antipsychotics. But the difficulty there, and this is something that I think I believe that children are the canary in the coal mine for a family and the health of that family. If a child gets caught doing something they're not supposed to do by a police or their school, there should be some sort of intervention, gentle intervention, aimed towards figuring out if there's something they can do to help the family and to gain access. There's a lot of social net programs, churches, whatever, but a lot of times there's not a connection made. And we do what we were very, very strong advocates of what we call violence interruption programs, where we actually try to figure out what, started a particular gang fight or where the needs are in the community when there's, violence that's happening. But I'm finding that a lot of our young men are kind of lost, and with the society, and the social media with all of these pictures of guns and, et cetera and so forth, it plants seeds in their heads if they're not quite right. I'm not saying that altogether those kinds of things are wrong. If you're in a good place, those kinds of things aren't a problem. It's these, and I mentor children, young adults, and one of the mentees that I had, I asked him, who would you go to if you were in a tough situation? Would you call your mom? He says, no, it would just be a problem for her. She would stress out about it. I says, who would you call? Because he was being raised by a single mother. And he says, I don't know. So a lot of these young men are feeling alone. And so that's the other aspect of community, is that I believe these young men need to be brought into some sort of, I don't know, there's lots of different things. And the particular thing that I'm in is part of brothers and sisters, or big brothers and big sisters. But what I'm saying to you is that we need to understand how violence occurs, what is going on with these children, and so that these mental health crises, because kids are, very, very impressionable, and we have so much out in the media, and they see, these militaristic types of images, and they're idolized and whatnot like that. And if a kid is not quite, completely satisfied in their life or getting the attention they need or participating in community, or if their family is just really stressed out and there's no one available to them, it's a problem. It becomes a very, very, very tough problem. And then if there's a gun thrown in the picture, then even the sense of feeling alone can lead to suicide, right? And whereas if that gun wasn't there, they wouldn't have committed suicide.
Now, one of the things, and I know that he's brought it up before, and I'm going to bring up our panelists as well. First off, where is the laws that you are talking about taking place? Are they national laws, or are they in the state that you are in? I know you mentioned New Mexico earlier, but I was just wondering, where are these actual laws taking place, and are there any national initiatives? And then the question I think Nick was asking when he was putting the banner on, and all along those lines, is there are some folks that will say that the Second Amendment maybe should be repealed or adjusted, and all along those lines. But I was just wondering your thoughts around that.
Well, some of the rulings from the Supreme Court on the Second Amendment, I think, are flawed, and I think they should probably be, the interpretation of the Second Amendment should be revisited, certainly. The interpretation that the Supreme Court did on it was very skewed towards the notion of it being an absolute right of an individual, whereas the Second Amendment says well-regulated militia. So the well-regulated part is completely missing in the interpretation. So the idea would be it's not an either or, have guns or not have guns. The idea is to encourage good behavior around gun ownership. And I wouldn't own a gun because I don't want to spend the time practicing how to use them correctly, going through all the machinations and the cost of, making sure they're secured, all of that kind of stuff, because I it takes time and it takes effort and has dedication. So if people that are irresponsible are getting hold of guns, this is a problem for our country. And we've got to figure out, first of all, I mean, there's a number of efforts that we've done in New Mexico, background checks and removing loopholes to background checks. The extreme risk protection orders, what's called ERPO. And that's something that we have in this, and we're training on that particular one, which means that you can remove a gun if somebody is suicidal or if there's a situation of domestic violence or something like that temporarily, and it doesn't go against the person's record that has the gun. Then, of course, you know, the gun, the access law or secure access guns, securely accessing guns. But another big area that we've got to focus on is the trafficking of guns. And that we can do this by following the ballistics and the gun pedigree, where it came from, when a crime is committed. We're not doing that, and we're not taking data. That's why I'm saying that the Second Amendment says nothing about taking data or registering guns or registering gun owners. This is an extreme view on the Second Amendment.
Yep. Definitely going to bring in Lee Newton Rhodes and Steve, go ahead, but I'm just going to bring in Lee Newton Rhodes, Jatovi, and J.D. Peterson, who's actually out in California. I think that they are both available as well, but definitely Lee Newton Rhodes is with us, and we'll see if the others are available as well. But definitely, Steve, go ahead. You had a question.
Yeah, just a couple of points. I'm going to chime on and come back in at the end. But a couple of things. First of all, Second Amendment, I think we have to realize that the Second Amendment was brought about by, well, first of all, Regina, we're so sorry for what's happened to your family, and it's just such a tragic story. We're glad that you could share it with us, with all of us here at Roku TV. But first of all, the Second Amendment was put in place in the United States to prevent insurrection or rebellion. So I don't think the founders of America wanted us to have the Second Amendment to justify people getting semi-automatic weapons and killing people in their homes or in schools or in movie theaters or grocery stores. So that's what I think, that we want to respect the gun right owners. I think a lot of times people make it about the Second Amendment, but I think it's not about the Second Amendment. It's about national security. And today, people don't feel safe going anywhere because they don't know who's going to get a gun. And I think the difficulty is tracking how we're going to do it. How are we going to enforce it, track early through intervention? Now, I know, like in North Carolina, the Speaker of the House, Tim Moore, and other Republicans often say, well, it's a mental health issue. I completely disagree. I mean, today, we have 4% of the world's population, but we have 45% of those guns. That means that we have a 250 times more chance of a gun homicide than Japan, 150 times more than Britain, and I think 100 times more than Germany. I think it's not for the policymakers, whether it's Mitch McConnell or even Senator Tom Tillis, our senior senator, actually worked with President Biden to bring gun reform after some of the shootings about a year and a half ago. But I'll just end with this point, that the bottom line is that it's not like in America we have 250 times more mentally ill people than Japan. The fact is that we have too many guns, and the guns are getting in the wrong hands. And in every nation where the gun homicides are low, it's when they have a lot of these things that you've talked about, background checks, leveraging, making it harder to get guns rather than making it easier. Now, at the same time, I want gun owners to know, I have many friends that are gun owners. They are law-abiding citizens, and they hunt and they fish and they do it the right way. And we're not saying that they're going to go out and kill people with their guns. So I think that we have to have a really respectful conversation. What happens is this becomes a political football where the NRA comes in and says, well, you can't do that, and we're not going to give you, and I'm in politics, so someone's going to give you an $8,000 or $10,000 check, and you got to spend $150,000 to get a 5-minute ad on TV in North Carolina, you're not going to speak up against guns because you got to win a primary, and then you got to win the governorship, right? Just let's say, or the U.S. Senate. So what happens is it's the gun owners versus the people that are, for gun rights, and then you don't have reform. I mean, that's so we're kind of like in a stalemate at this point, unless, people start seeing their own grandchildren die, like Republicans, that if their grandchild was killed, a 6-year-old granddaughter was killed, let's say, would they be looking at this issue differently and just saying, well, we can't deal with it right now. It's a mental health issue. I mean, it's like driving a car. It's like driving a car in the middle of traffic coming the other way, and then saying, "Well, it's going to go away." you keep going in that direction, you're going to get killed, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, that's just my final.
Just really quickly, because I saw that Debbie Peterson and you have apparently worked together in the past. You were saying that you had seen her and all along those lines. So I was just wondering what that connection was, because Debbie is a regular here as a panelist when we can get her, and she's been definitely regular on the last several weeks and everything, and we appreciate that. So I was just wondering y'all's connection and everything, because I did see that. So I'd love to see what that is all about.
Well, we're part of the same writing group, and Debbie actually featured me on her podcast, which is a fascinating podcast because it deals with the podcast that we did together dealt with the juvenile system and how they treated my nephew, which is a whole different ball of wax than the gun violence issue. Certainly, I'm an advocate for juvenile justice and the way we treat our children based on what I consider adult irresponsibility, honestly. And I just want to comment really quick on what Steve just shared. And somebody else put that in the notion of large magazines. Those are kind of the laws. We need to, we don't need really, really, really powerful weapons. And when I testify against some of these assault weapons, I'm an engineer. I actually have a PhD in engineering, and technology, we have to be in control of technology. So we're making more powerful guns. And one of the arguments they make, well, we've invested in all these AR-15s at our, range and blah, blah, and it's like, well, we don't need people walking around with military style. You don't need those for guns for hunting or anything like that. So those are the kind of common sense things that I think we need to get to: large capacity magazines, all of that. I will say that there is a study that I recently got a hold of, and it's a systems engineering kind of study, and they're looking at a national firearm injury prevention system. And it's along the lines of what happened when we were getting too many highway accidents. And they're talking with the entire community, the gun owners, the people that advocate for weapons, the various groups like the Every Town for Gun Safety, and lots of legislators. So with this last, bipartisan legislation that happened at the national level, they're taking some of that money and doing some serious thought about trying to create a way of this dialogue happening and coming together on some, fundamental things so that we can keep our children safe.
Speaking of keeping our children safe, because you kind of alluded to it, and I know you said that on the podcast you did with Debbie, you talked about it, but I am a advocate of juvenile justice as well, because my brother actually works with quote unquote at-risk youth. I don't always like that term because I sometimes think that it puts too much barriers on them and all along those lines and everything. But I was just wondering your thoughts around the justice system and the way we treat our young people when they have committed crimes, whether they are severe crimes or even minor crimes. I know we've even had a lot of juvenile incidents here in North Carolina as well, of various things, everything from people doing things with their motorcycles and vehicles to folks doing robberies and other things. So definitely juvenile justice is an important issue even here in Durham as well, Durham, North Carolina. But I'm just wondering your thoughts, because as I understand it, you took over the guardianship of your nephew as well, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yes, because I knew who my brother was and what he had been through in his life. I knew there was more going on than what the media was painting it out to be, and I knew my nephew. And so when the media just did their normal thing, and unfortunately our DA has funds to get the stories out in the media. So they're after a prosecution, and it doesn't matter, at all costs they go after prosecution. But fundamentally, we can't throw away our children. Children have the capacity. They're still in the stage where they're growing. at age 15 and up to age 25, their frontal lobes are still maturing. A normal child that's raised under normal circumstances doesn't mature their frontal lobe until they're 25 years old. So they're not good at making long-term decisions. They're very subject to peer pressure. So we need to treat these juveniles different, and we need to extend juvenile system until age 25. Now, if most children that are committing a lot of these crimes are children that are somehow, and I won't call it at risk, but have different factors, they're called the ACEs factors, that put them in a situation where they are more likely to be experiencing trauma in the home or trauma in their environment, and somehow, and the trauma in their environment, and this was true for my nephew, delays their brain as well. So we need to treat our children differently. And that, you know, at first my nephew was going to get out at age 21, and then there was an appeal, and it came down to he's going to get out at 21 or he stays in for life. And that dichotomy is horrible. This is a child that had been in essence incarcerated by his father, then he was incarcerated by the juvenile system, and then now and his shot was going to be at age 52, almost 53, before he would be a free person. And that was just a parole hearing. Well, the juvenile justice law that we passed this session earlier in March would change it to where the people that have committed crimes as juvenile will get a shot at parole 15 years into their sentencing. It's still not the best. I think that, you know, if the judge had the option of keeping him in the system till he was 25, then that's what she would have done. She even said that in her briefing, her conclusions when she did the sentencing. It's a crime. Again, it's the adults throwing away the children, and that's wrong. It's just wrong. We're throwing our children away, and it's because of our actions.
Yeah. Along those same lines, and I definitely want to hear from Lee, and I think that Toby's still around, and definitely Nick and Debbie may have questions for you as well, and all along those lines. But like I said, my brother's worked with a number of programs that are dealing with gang violence. I have other friends that are in that space as well and everything. And I know that a lot of times the kids that are getting involved in gangs are looking for a sense of belonging, for lack of a better term, and all along those kind of ways. So I just wanted your thoughts around that, because I know that there is a large gang problem, both there in New Mexico and California, even here in North Carolina and a number of other places. But I do think that a lot of times they are just trying to find outlets and trying to find some sort of connection, because they may not always have the connection at home. But I'd love to hear your thoughts around that.
Well, if you've ever, I don't know if you've ever had any encounters or interaction with gangs, but there's it is a family. My brother was involved in gangs. My brother that passed away was in the gangs in LA for 10 years. And it does become a family. It's a place where you swear by, to your brother, your fellow gang member, and that you'll die for them. And my nephew, unfortunately, is in prison now, and he had to ally with just a few Hispanics that are there. And in fact, he's been moved to North Carolina, and so there's a majority of Black people there, and if you know prisons, they're very, very, very racist, and it's just a difficult situation for these young. But and that's what I was saying earlier. Even healthy young people who are doing well in school feel a sense of disconnection and loneliness. Primarily men are young boys, because I don't, there's a barrier somehow. And I'm glad that your brother's working with at-risk children, but somehow we've got to put we got to put the counselors back in the high schools, for one thing, instead of police or harming our teachers or anything like that. We need to put counselors back. And I mean, I used to have a guy, our principal was really good at it, but we used to have counselors wandering the halls. My school that I went to was about 20% Black. about 40% Hispanic and about 10% Asian, and then the rest white. And so he would walk around and he would, high five and do the whole handshake thing with all these young men and make them feel heard and listened to. If young men don't have that kind of connection, they will, in extreme circumstances, ally with some of these, I would say, more extremist groups.
Yep. Lee, you had any thoughts, or Debbie? And definitely, I know Nick's probably got some as well. But Lee, I'll turn it over to you for a minute. I don't know if you've been listening, and definitely have some questions as well. You usually have some insightful questions.
Good morning. Welcome to Pod TV. A lot of what you said I resonate with. Thank you for coming. And I am so sorry for the trauma and the loss that you and your family have gone through. Recently, a few minutes ago, you mentioned something about the brain maturing, not till I believe 25. Should we question then putting boys 18 to 25 in the military, police, and so on, where we're giving them access to weapons and power and life decisions?
I think so, personally. This is a personal belief, but I think it's done purposely. There's a certain amount of brainwashing that they need to do to have a young man go out and kill people. It's just the facts of the matter. And it's been done for years. And so an 18-year-old is much more impressionable. And, I can remember for the Iraq War, these kids were playing these loud rock music in their heads about killing the bad guy, and it's just, part of my book, this is my book. I think I have it in the background, and it's won a national and international award. And chapter 40 talks about the systems that failed. But one of what we, and I'm a systems engineer, and we call it what we call a wicked problem. And it's an intractable problem, is the militarism and then the media in our society. Those two are two intractable problems. Doesn't mean military is bad. I, have a great respect, and we have tons of veterans in our family for, what was done during the world wars and the kinds of heroic efforts that went on there. But the militaristic stuff with the militia and these, tanks that the police are using and stuff like that, that's not normal for a civilized country,
Yep.
If I could just jump in for just a second.
Yeah,
and
go ahead.
Then I don't have a question, but I wanted to say it's so great to see Regina again, and I wanted to highly recommend her book, and also suggest if you want to hear more about her story and about her nephew, please do check out her book. It is a fascinating read. It changed the way I look at things, and I hope she'll show us what it was again. And also my podcast, Corruption Chronicles. I don't have Regina's story up yet, but I promise I'll get it up this week now, so that any of you want to go to Corruption Chronicles, Debbie Peterson on YouTube, and other platforms, you will be able to hear the whole story of Regina's nephew. And it's a very enlightening story. And thanks, Regina, for all of your efforts for young people. It takes huge courage.
Yep. Along those same lines and everything, you mentioned, and I love the title and everything, because like I said, I think that there are a number of things that need to be corrected, including some of our things around the way that we do corrections overall and the prison system overall as well. But I was just wondering, how extensive do you think these sins of the systems are, and can we do these kind of massive overhauls that probably need to take place? They've been talking about them taking place for decades. I know I've been a proponent of it, and I'm 61 for a number of decades as well, and I just have a small voice. But I was just wondering your thoughts about how extensive are the sins of the systems, and how much can we actually change them in our lifetime?
Yeah, that's a good question, Mark.
Well, those are the conversations we have, and I've been on panels within the League of Latin American Citizens, LULAC, League of United Latin American Citizens. I've been on panels for the Democratic Platform. These are the kinds of conversations we have to be in light of trying to be responsible adults, and we try to do a lot of bipartisan type conversations about. And that was the intent of my book. Really, it was besides, there's a term in Spanish that called descansos, which means to put it to rest, to pin it to the page so it's not rattling around in my brain. The other piece of it was systemic change. And I give 80% of the royalties to nonprofits half for juvenile justice, half for gun safety. And the other 20% I used to buy guns and mail them to legislators. So the idea is that we have to chip away at it, and we have to have these conversations, and we have to insist on the platform. And one of the things that Every Town for Gun Safety, and as part of that, Moms Demand Action is part of that organization. That's the umbrella organization. We support gun sense candidates. We don't support extremists. We support people that understand we've got a problem with guns. But there's other areas like juvenile justice that they support as well. We've got a lot of really great legislators in New Mexico. New Mexico also has a high amount of rural people, and those are the ones that are most against any kind of gun legislation. But we just have to chip away at it. And it took us 5 years to get the juvenile justice law through. And it took us 3 years to get the child access. And this year, what's on our platform is the assault weapons and the high capacity magazines. And also we have one of the highest gun violence or police violence rates in the nation. And so we have to address, accountability by bad actors. I support the law enforcement. I don't think any society should not have law enforcement, but there are always bad actors, and there's bad culture within some of those situations. But it's just chipping away, joining panels, being a part of organizations that have solutions, gaining ground. It's almost like climbing. If you're rock climbing, you get your foothold, and then you go for the next foothold, and you go for the next foothold, and you go for the next foothold until you make change, real change. And we understand, I was a systems engineer on MRIs. I did that in the 90s. MRIs have been around since the 80s. We know how the brain works. And so we have to, and that's one of the things that some of the opposition is about, is denying science, which is, I can't understand that as an engineer and a scientist. But we know that there's certain patterns of the brain that are affected by trauma, and that we know that our children are not in their right minds. And I use that loosely, but until they're 25, and they should be treated as juveniles.
Yeah, Regina, along those same lines, and I was just curious because one of the things that has oftentimes puzzled me, and I know I've brought it up on this show, sometimes folks give me pushback on it and everything, but how much do we allow the guns in from a government perspective as well? Because that's one of the things that I'm concerned about. Is you mentioned the gun trafficking, and I'm thinking that there either has to be a direct involvement from our government, or there has to be some kind of like blind turning of their eyes and all along those lines. But either way, I don't think that it is fair, and that our governments might be involved, whether it is on a state or a national level or even an international level, in some of that. And I was just wondering your thoughts around that, because that is a concern of mine.
Well, and there are bad actors in our congressional organizations that fight things like registering guns and doing the analysis. Again, my systems engineering background, we did extensive analysis as a systems organization. This is for a national laboratory on the supply chain for IEDs. We know how to do this. We know how to figure out what's going on with the trafficking of weapons and what the highest costs are. It's just the will to do it. And that's what we got to chip away at, because we know how to do this. We know how to figure out where the points are in the thing. And interestingly enough, you bring up the international edge at the LULAC conference that I attended here recently. The ambassador from Mexico spoke, and they have a lawsuit against the United States, because we're always talking about, at least the pundits and the propagandists are talking about how bad Mexico is because of all of the people coming across the border. By the way, I don't have an issue with a lot of the migration. Most of our immigration is legal immigration for technical and other jobs. There's what the propaganda that they have for the southern border is garbage, most of it. But any case, he's suing the United States because we are trafficking most of the guns that are used in drug trade to Mexico. And so this is the kind of thing that should receive national attention rather than the antics that some of these governors are doing and whatnot.
In the last few minutes, we're going to talk about the Republican debate in California this evening. But it'd be interesting to see how any Republican today could bring up a solution to this, and at the same time under their party's nomination.
But Steve, see, there is a solution to this. Okay, and we got to start with this one. And I'm not interested in picking away at it. I want to repeal the Second Amendment. It was written back in the 1700s by a bunch of old white slave owners that has no relevance today. And the first thing you're going to do, no matter how you play this game, you're always going to butt against this crazy thing that was written in the 1700s. Get rid of it, number one. Number two, mandatory mental health tests. We don't have that in this country, which is absolutely ridiculous, because the thing is, just like you have a physical, you should have a mental. And I'm sorry about your nephew, but let me tell you something. If he gets out of prison, he's still going to have mental problems. It ain't going to go away. And the first thing they do when you have mental problems, you deny that you have mental problems. And you're not going to take your medicine, and you're going to go back into schizophrenia level. So they're going to need court supervision for the rest of his life, whether he likes it or not. Just like I'm asthmatic, I got to take medicine for the rest of my life. If you have a mental condition, you have to take it for the rest of your life. Too bad. Third thing besides that, licensed insurance of all weapons. But we can't even do that because we have the First Amendment. But this addresses the problem, so we get to be like the progressive countries like Spain and Morocco, which their death rate by gun is 1/4% of ours. It's ridiculous. I go to Spain,
Nick,
Morocco, Italy.
Per capita, how are we doing?
The United States is not safe because of the Second Amendment. So until you get rid of the problem, I don't care. You can incarcerate all the parents that didn't lock up their guns. That's just putting a Band-Aid on the gun.
But I think the other thing is
you're not addressing the problem.
But the other thing that
this piece of trash called the Second Amendment. It's a bad law, badly written, badly enforced. Get rid of it. Yes, Steve.
The other thing that you forgot to mention, though, is technology.
So I could say it. What
technology. I mean, as we have more devices, this phone here, I've started a bad habit. I wake up with it every night on my chest. It's like phone, because I'm just on the phone all day, all night. And the bottom line is that we have to get these devices controlled by kids. I mean, with AI coming, on the forefront here, people are getting so disconnected from society. They're creating their own realities. When you're not interacting with people, you can get really, really lonely, and just not having the energy of people. I mean, I'll tell you a story. Like this week, my wife is at home all day because she's not working this week. And I'm working from home when I'm not traveling. But I don't like the fact where I get lonely myself when no one's in the house all day after I'm an empty nester. Imagine if somebody was lonely all day, they felt alone, and all they have is their technology. So one thing I like, where I went to high school at St. Andrews in Delaware, where actually one of President Biden's granddaughters attends in Middletown, Delaware, they have banned their cell phones are not allowed only on the weekends. They have restricted cell phone usage, which I think is wonderful, because the kids can have a normal educational experience by talking and interacting and not being addicted to the phone. And then they can look forward to it on the weekend. And it's really hard to enforce this, but I think that's a big problem that we're having, is the technology is connecting us to Wi-Fi networks, high-speed Wi-Fi, and all these great things we can do. But it's disconnecting our society from just...
Steve, along those same lines and everything, and I'd love to hear Regina's thoughts about this, is I've heard that there is I know we like to toss around this word epidemic, pandemic, and a lot of those other kind of terms, but there seems to be an epidemic of what Steve just alluded to, an epidemic of loneliness. And I've heard that a lot of people, particularly our young folks, are very much very constantly lonely, constantly trying to find outlets, and some of those outlets are those technological outlets that he was talking about, and all along those lines. But I'd love to hear your thoughts around that. And by the way, just as an aside, just to let you know, the other founder of the network, Nick, is one of the founders, and he is a pension attorney. But the other founder is Kim Calhoun, who was not able to make it today, but she is a fellow systems engineer, if I remember correctly. Am I correct, Nick? I think she's a systems engineer, if I remember correctly.
That is correct. Yes.
Yeah, I agree with Nick. If we could get rid of the Second Amendment, I'm all for it. And I agree that
pass reasonable
insurance.
laws. You can't pass it.
Yeah.
Your hands are tied by something that was done in the 1700s. Okay.
Right.
As long as your hands are tied, all you're doing is we're talking about it. And the thing is, the minute you unleash that, then all of a sudden the power of change actually can be effective. As long as you have this old document that everybody worships, thinking that God came down like Moses and gave it to him, we've got a serious problem in this country. It's called ignorance. And so just
and the insurance.
Oh yeah,
this is a big one.
Insurance on all the weapons. Come on.
Absolutely.
I have my car is licensed. Okay.
Right.
I have to pass a test to be able to drive.
Right.
You know, and you have insurance on your cars. You have licenses on that. We don't have that. We don't have reasonable gun laws. We're never going to have it as long as you have this thing called the Second Amendment. For step number one, get rid of it. It's a bad law. Get rid of it.
Yeah, that's a big hurdle.
Yeah, right.
And my husband's in the insurance agency.
The power of technology and the power of humans being able to make decisions, because I don't have some guy who's dead in 1700 making decisions for me. I refuse to do that. So here's what I do. I go to Europe. I feel safe in Italy. I feel safe.
You feel safe in Italy and everything. Hey, Regina,
I feel safe in Africa more than the United States of America, because this place, you know, people don't even want to come to when I travel internationally. The people in New Zealand go, why would I go to the United States? This is a country of violence. And you know, they're right. If I listened to the Spanish news and they showed what they showed here, I would not live here. I mean, come on.
And Nick, I'm not going to argue with what you're saying, but why are so many people trying to come to the United States?
They're not coming from Europe, my friend. They're not coming from Italy and Spain. They're coming from Venezuela, which is a failed state. And also
they're not just Venezuela. They're coming from all over
Central America, which has more gun crime than the United States. But they're coming from failed states. They're not coming from Europe, Lee. I'm sorry, they're not coming here.
Nope. We're not getting immigrants from.
Nope.
Yeah, they're coming from Europe. They're coming from
interesting.
Very, very few. As a matter of fact, they keep trying to say we can't meet our quota because the people from Spain, Italy, France, Germany, they don't want to come to the United States of America.
My son was in college up in Binghamton. He said so many people from China come up there. So many students from China.
And then they go back. I mean, you know, it's just.
No, they don't.
You know, the United States doesn't, but we're talking about Europe, Lee. Okay, we're talking about Europe, which is safer than the United States. There's not a big migration into the United States.
Hey, and Lee, just to let you know, as a personal,
and your Second Amendment here sucks. Okay,
I hear what you're saying. We repeal and everything, but Lee, to your point, I've run across a couple of Chinese individuals that are here for school. I think I got some upstairs and all along those lines, and quite often they are going back. So they are literally like Nick said, they're generic.
The people in Venezuela would go back. The immigrants in Venezuela would go back if their country wasn't so corrupt and mismanaged, because it was one time and still is today one of the wealthiest countries in the United States, in the world, including the biggest oil reserves in the world. Unfortunately, because some people believe, well, if I nationalize everything, that life will be better, and it wasn't. Instead, what happens is all the people that knew how to run the oil wells left. And so all of a sudden they have the biggest reserves and no way to produce it profitably. So Venezuela is a failed state. As you go to El Salvador, Guatemala, Nicaragua, they're all failed states. The gun crime there is worse than the United States. And we're not good. So what we do is we have a failed system. Our international policies in Latin America and Central America are absolutely horrible. The Democrats and Republicans won't talk about it because like Steve says, I can't talk about guns, I can't get elected. Okay? We can, because if we're not running for office, I can tell you repeal the Second Amendment.
That's the way
what some redneck
wait a minute, I don't understand. If so many people are against the Second Amendment, Nick, why can't they get elected?
Pardon?
If so many people are anti-Second Amendment, why can't that be a policy issue?
As a Republican, you cannot. It's political suicide. I mean, the way this game works, let's say you're a Republican in North Carolina legislature. If you're going to get a committee appointment by the Speaker, or you're going to move up in the House, you're going to have to be in line with every major vote. They come in, let me finish. They come in, they tell you, this is how you're going to have to vote on every bill. And if you're not with the caucus, we're going to primary you in your next election. So if you're going to move up, what are you going to do? And guess what the Democrats do? They do the same thing. So
See, this is where the spine comes in handy.
Yes.
Have a spine.
Yeah, but if you have a spine, the people with the spine are afraid that they will not get elected. Think of Liz Cheney, who took on Donald Trump, the daughter of the former vice president of the United States and the Secretary of Defense and chief of staff for two former presidents. She took on the Republicans. Where is she? She's incognito now, right? And so I think the bottom line is that political suicide as a Republican to say I'm going to repeal the Second Amendment. So they're either going to become a Democrat or you can become an independent or no labels like Joe Manchin, who, he won't win again. He won't run for the U.S. Senate again, but, he won't win the presidency if he runs. So anyway.
Let's face it.
Hey, just really quickly and everything. Hold on a second, because I know we're
also as well. But the media has no chutzpah. If they would, they'd be saying this. But they don't. They just do not have any backbone or spine. I'm sorry. So if you have backbone or spine, you say it. If you're a worm, just don't say it.
But just one real quick question that I wanted to hear from Regina as we're winding down and everything. I didn't hear her thoughts around the loneliness part, but we can save that for another time. Hopefully Regina will make a return appearance. I definitely enjoyed hearing a lot of her background and a lot of what she's been talking about, and agree with just about all of it and all along those lines. But do you think, because Steve mentioned it earlier, the debate and all along those lines, do you actually think that the gun issue will be heard from any of these? I think it's 6 candidates, it might be 7, but do you think that they will even touch on the issue at the debate that we're going to be hearing later on this evening? Or are they, like Steve said, going to be afraid to even tackle the issue?
Well, because it is a primary, they're going to be extreme in their views, and they have to pander to their base, which are people that are extremists when it comes to the gun issue. So if it's brought up, it will be an extreme view on it.
Yeah, I'm going to begin my closeout, Mark, if you don't mind. We want to thank the gun for
Regina
Greigo for attending. And we look forward to bringing you back on the show. This was a very engaging, productive conversation. As I close out the show, we'll be talking about what the debate, the after effects of the debate. We also are going to be talking about the UAW strike and, what that means in terms of the future of unions and workers in North Carolina and across the country, especially with so much automation taking place and more job loss. I think you're going to start seeing more workers go on strike, demanding not only more wages, but just jobs that are going to literally be eliminated in the next 6 months to a year because of AI. But what I will say is tonight is a very important night for the Republican Party. This will be the last chance for the Republicans to focus in on why they should be their party's nominee versus Donald Trump. We all know that this is a former president who has been charged with crimes, not convicted yet. He's had all kinds. Today, he was found guilty of another tax fraud. But at the end of the day, they have to make the case to Republicans that they would do a better job of being the nominee and winning the presidency of the United States. They have just not succeeded in doing that. So tonight, in my opinion, the debate will be just about that. They might focus on Joe Biden, which is good, but that's not enough. What they have to do is make an intelligent argument. Who will it be? Nikki Haley, DeSantis, who seems to be fizzling away, or will it be Chris Christie, who I think does have a chance, but this is his last chance, I think. If he doesn't perform well tonight, I think he won't be invited back to debate. And I hope that they can convince former President Trump to debate. I think if you run for the president of the United States, you should stand there alongside your colleagues in your party and once again say why, as a former president, you deserve to stand there and be the party's nominee, and why you would even want to be the president of the United States. Can he win again? Absolutely, he can. It's scary, but he could become the first former president indicted and convicted to be elected again as the president of the United States. We are living in very, very different turbulent times. Bring out your popcorn. It's going to be an interesting 2024. Debate us tonight in California. Hope Gavin Newsom is watching closely as some are talking to him, the governor of California, of vying for his party's nomination for president in 2024 against the incumbent president, Joe Biden, who is a young 83 years old. Thank you for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow for another engaging conversation. And remember, World Politics is tomorrow at 5 o'clock. I'll be leading the charge there along with Kim and Nick and all the others and Mark Lee. Thank you all so much.
Yeah, just really quickly, and just I know that it's a little bit of a segue, but Regina, just really quickly, if you can tell folks how you can get your book. I know we've been scrolling the book title across, but we have definitely talked a lot about the book.
Thank you, Mark.
Would love to hear how they can get a copy of the book as well.
Like I said,
I do hope that you will make a return engagement, because I definitely have enjoyed our conversation. Hope that you'll make a return trip at some point as well.
Yeah, I'd love to join you again. It's available on Amazon. It's available at Barnes & Noble. It's all on Audible as well. So just to your favorite store. You can also order it through your local bookstore, because it's available out there.
Appreciate it, and hopefully folks will get a copy of that book. It definitely sounds like a great book. I'm gonna try to get a copy myself at some point as well. So on that note, we're going to get on out of here, and I'm glad that you're doing this very important and needed work, Ms. Greigo, and everything. So hopefully we'll see you back in the near future and have you share some of your other thoughts as well. And we'll have some of our other panelists on the show that were not able to make it, like Sasha Starr and Jacoby was trying to pop in and out. He's actually the gentleman that asked about the magazine, the large magazines and all along those lines, but he was actually at a appointment today, but he's also involved in the esports industry as well. So I'm sure he might have had some thoughts with you around gaming and all along those lines. So we'll have to have some conversations about that on a later show.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Regina. If you could email me the book link, I could go, but that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So we're going to get on out of here.